The door doesn't creak. Delilah has oiled the hinges every week for 8 years, her hands working the brass with careful precision, ensuring silence for the sleeping children within. Now, on this suffocating August night in 1844, that same silence serves a different master. She stands at the threshold of the nursery, one bare foot on the hallway runner, the other poised above the polished pine floor of the children's room. Moonlight filters through the tall windows, fractured by the Spanish moss that hangs from the live oaks outside Ashwood Plantation like the beards of drowned men. The light falls across 3 small beds arranged along the far wall, each draped in white muslin netting that glows ghostly pale in the darkness. In Delilah's hands, she clutches strips of cotton. Raw cotton. Not the fine, woven fabric that clothes the Rowan family, but the crude, unprocessed fiber, bolls broken open, seeds still clinging to some of the tufts. Her fingers have wound the strips around her palms like a fighter preparing for battle, the coarse fibers pressing into skin that bears 15 years of scars. 15 years of picking. 15 years of bleeding. 15 years of building the Rowan fortune, one white puff at a time. Her heartbeat thunders in her ears, so loud she's certain it will wake them. But the children sleep on, their breathing soft and even in the heavy air. Even this late, past midnight, the Mississippi heat refuses to break. It presses down on everything like a hand over a mouth, thick and wet and suffocating. Margaret in the first bed, 8 years old, her blonde hair spread across the pillow. Thomas in the middle, 6, one small hand curled beneath his chin. Catherine at the far end, only 4, the baby, her thumb slack against her lower lip. Delilah's foot crosses the threshold. The floorboard accepts her weight without protest, she knows every one by heart, which ones sing and which ones hold their secrets. She has walked this floor countless times in the dark, summoned by cries and coughs and nightmares. The children have always called for her in the darkness. Delilah, they would whimper. Delilah, I'm frightened. And she would come, and she would soothe, and she would sing songs her own mother taught her, back when singing was still possible. Tonight, they don't call. Tonight, she comes unbidden. 3 steps into the room. The cotton tightens around her hands. 4 steps. She can smell them now, the lavender water Mistress Rowan insists be sprinkled on their sheets, the faint sourness of milk on Catherine's breath, the pomade in Thomas's hair. 5 steps. Her shadow falls across Margaret's bed. If you're captivated by this dark tale from America's blood-soaked past, subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. And down in the comments, I want to know, can true horror ever be justified? Leave your thoughts below. But we must go back. Back before this moment, before this night. Back to understand how cotton, that soft, white, innocent thing, could become an instrument of the unspeakable. Delilah's first memory of cotton is pain. She was 7 years old, maybe 8, enslaved people weren't allowed to know their birthdays with certainty, when the overseer, a rail-thin man named Silas Crenshaw with tobacco-stained teeth, first sent her into the fields. Hands too small for housework, still big enough to pick, he'd said, shoving her toward the endless rows that stretched to the horizon under a sun that seemed to take personal offense at the existence of shade. The bolls looked soft from a distance. Delilah remembered thinking they looked like snow, though she'd never seen snow, only heard it described by the older slaves who'd been brought down from Virginia. She reached for her first bowl with the eagerness of a child given a new task. The sharp edges of the bowl sliced her fingertip open immediately. She'd gasped, jerked her hand back, watched the bright bead of blood well up and drip onto the white cotton. The red disappeared into the fibers instantly, hungrily, as if the plant itself was thirsty for what she had to give. You gonna bleed for every bowl you touch? Crenshaw had laughed. Best toughen up, girl. Got 10 hours ahead of you, and you ain't picked enough to fill a thimble. By the end of that first day, both her hands were ribbons of cuts, the cotton fibers working into the wounds like tiny knives, each movement agony. Her back screamed from bending. Her legs shook. She'd filled half a sack, pathetic by any measure. The other slaves, moving with the mechanical efficiency of long practice, had filled 3, 4, 5 sacks each. Her mother, whose name was Ruth though the Rowans called her simply, the washerwoman, had held Delilah's destroyed hands that night in the slave quarters, picking out the embedded fibers by firelight. This is what we are, Ruth had whispered. This is what they make us. Cotton to cotton, blood to blood. Now, standing over Margaret's bed, Delilah looks down at her hands wrapped in that same cotton. The scars have created a map across her palms, white lines against dark skin, a testament written in tissue. She flexes her fingers. The cotton pulls taut. The child sleeps on, unaware. Her lips are parted slightly, her breath a gentle whisper. In sleep, she looks almost porcelain, a doll crafted by some master artisan. Delilah has dressed this child every morning for 6 years, since Margaret was barely more than a toddler. She knows every freckle on her nose, every cowlick in her hair. She has wiped her tears and her runny nose and the food from her chin. She has also watched this child learn to command. Delilah, fetch my ribbons. Delilah, I don't like this dress. Delilah, you're pulling my hair too tight. Never, please. Never, thank you. Those words weren't for people like Delilah. By the time Margaret could form sentences, she understood the hierarchy of Ashwood Plantation as naturally as breathing. White over black. Free over enslaved. Human over property. Delilah's hands begin to tremble. The cotton strips quiver in the moonlight. Another memory, sharper than the bull edges, Master Edmund Rowan's belt. She'd broken a teacup. Accident, pure accident, her hands slippery with soap water, the delicate china simply sliding from her grasp to shatter across the dining room floor. Mistress Beatrice Rowan had screamed as if Delilah had murdered someone. And perhaps, in Mistress Beatrice's mind, she had, each piece of that imported china represented money, represented status, represented a life Beatrice had married into and would defend with vicious precision. Master Rowan had come at the summons. He was a large man, broad-shouldered from his youth spent in his father's fields before inheriting Ashwood. He kept his belt well-oiled, the leather supple. Can't have carelessness, he'd said calmly, almost pleasantly, as he folded the belt in half. Sets a bad example for the others. 10 lashes in the courtyard. The other slaves were forced to watch, that was important, making them watch. Delilah had been 17. She'd gripped the whipping post and tried not to scream, knowing screaming would only prolong it, and would excite him. The belt fell like thunder, like judgment, like a baptism in agony. When it was over, when her back was a geography of split skin and welling blood, he'd patted her head almost affectionately. There now. All's forgiven. Clean yourself up and get back to work. The cotton of her dress had stuck to the wounds. Ruth had peeled it away that night, layer by careful layer, the fabric taking bits of skin with it. Don't hate, Ruth had whispered, tears streaming down her weathered face. Hate'll kill you faster than any whip. You got to survive. You got to. But Ruth hadn't survived. She'd collapsed in the wash house 3 years later, her heart simply giving out at age 42, worked literally to death. No funeral, no marker. Just a body wrapped in burlap and buried in the slave cemetery beyond the property line, where the land turned swampy and nothing valuable could grow. Delilah had been 20 then. And she'd learned that her mother was wrong. Hate didn't kill. Hate kept you alive when nothing else could. She takes another step closer to Margaret's bed. The muslin netting parts easily at her touch, so fine it might as well not exist. A barrier of pretense, like so many things at Ashwood. But the memory that burns brightest, the one that has carved itself into her soul like names carved into a tree, is this. A warm morning in April, 3 years ago. Delilah's daughter, her secret daughter, fathered by a slave named Jacob who'd been sold off before the child was born, playing in the dirt outside the kitchen house. Her name was Grace. 3 years old, with her mother's dark eyes and her grandmother's smile. Delilah had managed to keep her close, to steal moments with her between the endless demands of the Rowan household. Then Mistress Beatrice had debts. Gaming debts, though it wasn't spoken of directly. The plantation might look prosperous, but there were always debts. Cotton prices fluctuated. The soil was starting to wear thin. And slaves, particularly young ones with years of work ahead of them, commanded good prices. Delilah had been in the main house, helping Margaret with her lessons, when she'd heard Grace crying outside. She'd run to the window in time to see the slave trader loading her daughter onto a wagon. Jacob Merchant, the man was called, a name Delilah would remember forever, chiseled into her mind like letters on a gravestone. No. Delilah screamed, running for the door. Master Rowan had caught her arm, held her back with crushing strength. She's sold, Delilah. Done deal. You got no say in it. Please, Delilah had begged, all pride abandoned. Please, Master Rowan, she's my baby, she's my property, he'd corrected calmly. And I've sold her. New Orleans, I believe. Good home, probably. Better than here, might be. You should be grateful. Grateful. Delilah had watched the wagon roll down the oak-lined drive, Grace's small hands reaching back toward her, her cries fading into the distance. And something in Delilah had died that day. Or perhaps something had finally, fully been born. That night, she tried to cut her own throat with a kitchen knife. Ruth had found her, stopped her, held her through the shaking sobs. Your time will come, Ruth had whispered, fierce and desperate. Your time will come to make it mean something. Now, standing over Margaret Rowan's sleeping form, cotton strips wound around her hands like prophecy, Delilah knows, the time has come. The child's chest rises and falls, rises and falls. So peaceful. So innocent. But innocence is a luxury built on blood. Delilah's hands stop trembling. A terrible calm settles over her, cold despite the heat, final as a closing door. She looks at the cotton wound around her palms, white as virtue, soft as lies. The same crop that built this house, that bought these children's silk dresses and lead soldiers and leather shoes. The same crop that bought and sold human beings like livestock. The same crop whose thorns have drunk her blood and her mother's blood and the blood of thousands like them. Tonight, the cotton will serve a different purpose. Tonight, the harvest comes home. Delilah unwraps one strip from her right hand, holds it between her fingers. It's perhaps 2 feet long, twisted into a rough rope. The moonlight catches the fibers, makes them glow. She leans forward over Margaret's bed. The child's eyes remain closed, her breathing undisturbed. One small hand rests on the blanket near her face, the fingers curled slightly inward. Delilah has held that hand 1,000 times, guiding it with a spoon, pulling her back from the stairs, helping her down from horses. Now she reaches toward the child's face, the cotton strip dangling from her scarred fingers. Margaret's lips part slightly wider as she breathes in. Delilah's hand moves closer. Closer. The cotton touches the child's lower lip, soft as a whisper, soft as a lie, soft as 15 years of picking beneath the merciless sun. And Delilah begins to lean forward. Margaret's skin is warm beneath Delilah's fingertips. For a moment, one crystalline, suspended moment, Delilah's hand hovers there, the cotton pressed against the child's lips but not yet inside, not yet committed. The moon slides behind a cloud, and the nursery plunges into deeper shadow. In that darkness, Delilah can almost pretend she is someone else, somewhere else, her hands doing something other than this unspeakable thing. But then the moon emerges again, and she is exactly who she has always been, property of Ashwood Plantation, owned by the Rowan family, body and soul bound to this place of magnolias and misery. Her hand moves with practiced efficiency. The cotton slips between Margaret's lips. The child's eyes flutter but don't open. Her throat works reflexively, trying to swallow, confused by the foreign texture invading her mouth even in sleep. Delilah's other hand comes up, gentle but firm against the small jaw, keeping it from closing completely as she works the cotton deeper, packing it carefully, methodically. This is not so different from the 1,000 other tasks she's performed for this child. Feeding her when she was an infant, Mistress Beatrice was too delicate to nurse her own baby. Delilah's own daughter had been only weeks old then, and Mistress Beatrice had seen an opportunity, had taken it without asking, without considering. "You'll feed Margaret," she'd announced, as if discussing the weather. "Your milk is good enough for that." So Delilah had fed the master's daughter while her own child went hungry, supplemented with water and cornmeal mush that gave baby Grace colic. She'd held Margaret to her breast in the morning room while Grace cried in the slave quarters, tended by whoever had a spare moment between their endless labors. Margaret's eyes snap open. Blue eyes, wide with confusion rather than fear. Not yet fear. She sees Delilah's face above her, familiar as her own mother's, more familiar perhaps, because Delilah is the one who comes in the night, Delilah is the one who soothes nightmares, Delilah is safe. The child tries to speak, but the cotton muffles everything. Her small hands come up, grasping at Delilah's wrists, not fighting yet, just questioning. Why? What's happening? The trust is still there in her eyes, the assumption that whatever Delilah is doing must be for her own good. Delilah adds more cotton. Her movements are steady, unhurried. She has learned patience in the cotton fields, where rushing meant mistakes, meant the overseer's switch across your shoulders. She has learned thoroughness in the house, where a speck of dust on a mantle could earn a slap, where imperfection was met with punishment. Now she applies these hard-won lessons to a darker purpose. Margaret's hands tighten on Delilah's wrists. The confusion in her eyes begins to curdle into something else. Her small body jerks beneath the blankets. And Delilah remembers another child, another pair of small hands grasping. She'd been 12 years old when she first came to the main house. Master Rowan's mother, the imperious Constance Rowan, had selected her personally. This one has a docile look about her, the old woman had said, circling Delilah like a buyer examining livestock. Which, Delilah supposed, she was. Pretty enough but not too pretty. Smart eyes but not clever. She'll do it for the children. There were 2 children then, Edmund Jr., who would die of yellow fever at age 16, and Beatrice's older sister Caroline, who would marry a Charleston merchant and move away. Delilah's job was simple: attend to their needs, carry their things, dress them, undress them, exist as an extension of their will. She learned quickly that white children were taught ownership like they were taught their letters. It started with small things. Delilah, carry my books. Delilah, tie my shoes. The requests came without thought, automatic as breathing, because from birth they'd watched their parents command and be obeyed. But it progressed. Edmund Jr. had a cruel streak, liked to pinch the soft flesh under Delilah's arms when no one was looking, laughing when she flinched. Caroline enjoyed more psychological torments, telling Delilah elaborate, false instructions, then reporting her failures to Mistress Constance, who administered punishment with righteous enthusiasm. "They're just children," Ruth had said when Delilah complained. "They are learning what they have been taught." "And what happens when they grow up?" Delilah had asked. "When will they have children of their own?" Ruth had looked at her with ancient, tired eyes. "Then the poison passes on. That's how it works, baby. Sin to sin, generation to generation, until somebody stops it or the whole thing burns down. Margaret is fighting now." Her small body thrashes against the mattress, her hands clawing at Delilah's arms. Red scratches appear on Delilah's dark skin, bright as guilt. The child's legs kick against the blankets, her head shaking side to side, desperate to dislodge the cotton that fills her mouth, that creeps toward her throat. Delilah holds her down. It takes no effort, she is so much larger, so much stronger. All those years of labor have built muscle into her arms, corded strength into her back. Margaret weighs nothing, resists with all the force of a baby bird fallen from its nest. The child's eyes are wide with terror now, with betrayal. "Why?" they ask. "Why are you doing this?" "Because," Delilah answers silently, "you were born into sin. Because your silk dresses are woven from my blood. Because you would have grown up to own people, to sell them, to break them as casually as your mother breaks her morning eggs. Because 3 years ago, I held my daughter and promised her I would remember. I would remember everything." Grace had been born in a small cabin Delilah shared with 3 other house slaves. No doctor, no midwife, just old Esther, who'd brought dozens of babies into the world and buried twice as many. The labor had lasted 14 hours, and Delilah had bitten through a leather strap to keep from screaming, not wanting to disturb the main house. When Grace finally emerged, slick and wailing, Delilah had looked into her daughter's face and felt a joy so pure it was nearly unbearable. This was hers. This small, perfect thing was actually hers, in a life where nothing else was. "Don't love her too much," Esther had warned, cutting the cord with a kitchen knife. "They can take what you love. Better to keep some distance, protect your heart." But Delilah couldn't help it. She loved Grace with a fierceness that terrified her, that made her understand why animals fought to the death defending their young. For 3 years, Grace was the only beautiful thing in Delilah's world. Her laugh was music. Her small arms wrapping around Delilah's neck were a benediction. Her existence made the suffering bearable, gave it meaning. Then the wagon had come. Jacob Merchant, with his leather ledger and his practiced eye, examining Grace like she was a horse. Checking her teeth, her joints, looking for signs of disease or weakness. And Mistress Beatrice standing on the porch, fanning herself, discussing price as casually as if they were negotiating for a bolt of fabric. "She's still young yet," merchant had said. "But healthy. Good stock. I can give you 200. 250, Mistress Beatrice had countered. "She's been raised in the house, has decent manners." They'd settled on 225. Grace had been worth $225. Less than a good horse. More than a used plow. Delilah had fallen to her knees, had begged, and had debased herself completely. Master Rowan had kicked her aside like a dog. "Stop your caterwauling," he'd said. "You're upsetting the children." The children. His children. Who stood in the window watching, Margaret's small hand pressed against the glass, her face curious but unmoved, already learning that some people's grief didn't matter. Margaret's struggles are weakening. Her small chest heaves, fighting for air that won't come. The cotton has done its work, packed tight enough to seal, soft enough to conform to every contour of her mouth and throat. Her hands still grasp at Delilah, but the movements are sluggish now, confused. Delilah leans close, her face near the child's. She wants Margaret to see her, to really see her for the first time. Not as furniture, not as a fixture of the household, but as a person. A person with a will. A person with the power to take what has always been taken from her. "I had a daughter," Delilah whispers, her voice barely audible. Her name was Grace. Margaret's eyes are glazing, the blue fading to something distant. But Delilah continues anyway. "You never asked about her. None of you did. She played in the yard while you played. She was sold, and you watched, and then you asked me for supper." The child's body gives one final, convulsive jerk. Then stillness. Delilah holds her position for another moment, making sure. The cotton has compressed under her palm, forced deeper by Margaret's own struggles. There will be no coming back from this. No miracle. No reprieve. Finally, Delilah straightens. She looks down at what she's done. Margaret lies peaceful now, her face composed except for the cotton visible between her slightly parted lips. She could be sleeping still, except for the absolute quality of her stillness, the way death settles over a body like frost. One done. Two remain. Delilah turns toward Thomas's bed, unwinding fresh cotton from her left hand. The strips fall away from her palm in a slow spiral, catching moonlight. Her hands no longer tremble. Her heartbeat has steadied. She feels neither triumph nor horror, only a vast, empty purposefulness, like a river that has finally worn through its banks and rushes toward the sea, unstoppable, inevitable. Thomas sleeps on his side, facing away from his sister's bed. He doesn't know yet that he's alone in a way he's never been before. He doesn't know that the world has changed in the darkness, that innocence has been corrupted, that the nursery has become a tomb. But he will know soon. Delilah approaches his bed with the same careful silence she used for Margaret. The same practiced steps. The same deadly efficiency born from years of service, now perverted to this final, terrible task. Her shadow falls across the sleeping boy. The cotton hangs from her hand like a noose. Thomas dreams of horses. In his dream, he rides the great black stallion his father keeps in the stables. Midnight, they call him, galloping across the cotton fields at dawn, the white bulls blurring into a sea of foam beneath him. In the dream, he is older, stronger, and a master of everything he surveys. The slaves wave as he passes, smiling their broken smiles, grateful for his benevolence. He doesn't hear Delilah approach. The first thing that wakes him is her hand on his shoulder, rolling him gently onto his back. His eyes open slowly, still caught between sleeping and waking, the dream horse fading into the familiar shadows of the nursery. "Delilah?" His voice is small, confused. A 6-year-old boy pulled from pleasant dreams into uncertain darkness. She says nothing. In the moonlight, her face could be carved from stone, beautiful and terrible and utterly remote. Thomas has seen this face 1,000 times, serving his breakfast, drawing his bath, picking up the toys he's scattered across the floor. He has never really looked at it, never seen the person behind the mask of servitude. He sees her now. And something in what he sees makes his stomach clench with instinctive fear. "I had a bad dream," he tries, hoping this explanation will make sense of the wrongness he feels. "Can you sing? Mama says you have a pretty voice." Delilah's hand moves to his face. She touches his cheek with a tenderness that would seem maternal if not for the cotton she holds in her other hand, if not for the fixed intensity of her gaze. Your mama, Delilah says softly, has never heard me sing what I wanted to sing. Before Thomas can process these strange words, the cotton is against his lips. His reaction is immediate, he jerks his head away, his small hands coming up to push her away. But Delilah is ready. Her hand clamps over his mouth, firm and unyielding, while her other hand works the cotton between his lips with practiced efficiency. Thomas bites down. His small teeth sink into the flesh of her palm. Delilah doesn't flinch. She's felt worse pain that makes this tiny sting feel like nothing at all. She simply waits for his jaw to tire, then forces it open wider, packing more cotton inside. The boy's eyes are wild with terror now, all traces of sleep vanished. He thrashes beneath her, his legs kicking against the mattress, his hands grabbing at her dress, her arms, anything he can reach. One small fist connects with her jaw, a solid blow that snaps her head to the side. For a moment, their eyes meet. And in that moment, something passes between them that cannot be named. Recognition, perhaps. Or the acknowledgement of something that has always existed but never been spoken, that the kindness he's been taught to expect from her was a lie, that beneath every, yes, Master Thomas, and, right away, Master Thomas, was a human being with her own will, her own rage, her own capacity for violence. Delilah forces more cotton into his mouth. She remembers the day Thomas was born. It had been a difficult delivery. Mistress Beatrice had screamed for hours, her cries echoing through Ashwood's halls like the wails of the damned. Master Rowan had paced the library, drinking brandy, while Delilah and the other house slaves had scrambled to fetch hot water, clean linens, whatever the doctor demanded. When the baby finally emerged, purple and squalling, Mistress Beatrice had wept with relief. A son, she'd gasped. Edmund, we have a son. A son. An heir. Someone to carry on the Rowan name, to inherit Ashwood and its 300 acres of cotton, its 47 slaves, its legacy of prosperity built on broken backs. Delilah had been the one to wash the baby, to wrap him in the soft blanket Mistress Beatrice had embroidered during her confinement. She'd looked down at the tiny, wrinkled face and felt nothing but a distant pity. This child would never know freedom, she'd thought. Not real freedom. He would be a prisoner of his own privilege, chained to a system that demanded he view other human beings as property. But pity had its limits. When Thomas was 2 years old, he toddled into the kitchen where Delilah was kneading bread. He'd grabbed a handful of dough and laughed when she gently tried to retrieve it. When she persisted, he'd thrown the dough at her face and screamed, "No. Mine." Mistress Beatrice had rushed in at the sound of her son's cries. She'd seen the dough on Delilah's face, had seen her son's red, angry expression, and had slapped Delilah across the mouth without asking what had happened. "Never deny him anything," she'd hissed. "Do you understand? He is your better. He is your master. 2 years old, and already a master." Thomas's struggles are becoming less coordinated. His small body jerks and spasms as his brain begins to starve for oxygen. His hands still claw at Delilah's arms, but the movements are weaker now, desperate rather than forceful. Delilah watches his face with an attention that borders on reverence. She is memorizing this moment, the exact angle of the moonlight across his features, the way his blonde hair has fallen across his forehead, the pattern of freckles on his nose that she's wiped clean of dirt 100 times. She is also watching him realize. Watching the moment when the terror in his eyes shifts into understanding, he is going to die. This woman who has served him his entire life, who has fed him and clothed him and answered his every demand, is killing him. The injustice of it must be staggering to his child's mind. He is Thomas Rowan. He is meant to inherit the world. How can this be happening? Delilah could answer, if he could hear. She could tell him about the injustice of being born into chains. About the injustice of watching your mother work herself to death. About the injustice of having your child ripped from your arms and sold like livestock. About the injustice of existing as property, as a thing rather than a person, every moment of every day. But she says nothing. Let him die with his questions unanswered. Let him take his confusion into whatever darkness awaits. His body gives a final, convulsive shudder. His eyes, still open, go glassy and fixed. The life leaves him so suddenly it's almost anticlimactic, one moment a struggling child, the next a small corpse cooling in the Mississippi heat. Delilah removes her hands slowly. She looks at her palms. Thomas's saliva has mixed with blood from where he bit her, creating small red smears across her lifelines. She wipes them absently on her dress. 2 done. 1 remains. The memory comes unbidden, sharp as broken glass. Thomas at 4 years old, toddling after her in the garden. She'd been picking herbs for the kitchen, rosemary, thyme, sage, and he'd followed her with the single-minded determination of a very young child. Delilah, pick me up, he demanded. She'd had her hands full of herbs, had been trying to finish her task before the dinner preparations. In a moment, Master Thomas. Now. He'd stamped his small foot. She'd set down the herbs and lifted him onto her hip, the way she'd lifted Grace 100 times. He'd wrapped his small arms around her neck and pointed at a butterfly dancing among the roses. Pretty, he'd said. Yes, she'd agreed. Very pretty. For a moment, just a brief, treacherous moment, she'd felt something almost like affection. He was so small, so innocent in that instant. Not a master, just a child enchanted by a butterfly. Then he'd grabbed her hair and yanked hard, laughing when she gasped in pain. Funny, he shrieked. Do it again. She'd set him down carefully and returned to her herbs, her scalp throbbing. And she'd thought, this is what they are. Even the young ones. Even the ones who sometimes seem almost human. They are taught from birth that our pain is entertainment, our suffering a joke. There is no innocence at Ashwood. Only varying degrees of guilt. Delilah turns toward the final bed. Catherine. The baby. 4 years old with her mother's delicate features and her father's stubborn chin. The child who sometimes, not often, but sometimes, had shown small kindnesses. Sharing a piece of horehound candy. Bringing Delilah a flower from the garden. Small things, meaningless in the grand architecture of oppression, but real nonetheless. Delilah's hand tightens on the remaining cotton strips. Does Catherine deserve this? Can a 4-year-old bear the sins of her family, her race, her world? But then Delilah remembers, Grace was 3 when they sold her. 3 years old, and the Rowans had calculated her worth in dollars and cents, had traded her away without a moment's hesitation. If Grace could be condemned for the sin of her birth, why should Catherine be spared for hers? The cotton feels heavier now, laden with the weight of what it represents. In Delilah's mind, she sees the field stretching endlessly, row after row of white bowls soaking up sun and blood in equal measure. She sees the gin house where the cotton is processed, the massive machines that separate fiber from seed with brutal efficiency. She sees the bales loaded onto riverboats, shipped to mills in Massachusetts and England, transformed into cloth that clothes the world. And she sees the people who make it all possible, the enslaved men and women who plant and pick and process, who live and die in service to this white gold, who are themselves bought and sold like the crop they tend. Catherine's breath is soft and even, undisturbed by her siblings' deaths mere feet away. She sleeps the deep, trusting sleep of a cherished child who has never known true fear. Delilah approaches with the cotton hanging from her hands like a sacrament. Like a curse. Like an ending long overdue. Catherine doesn't wake immediately. Delilah stands over the smallest bed, looking down at the child who still sucks her thumb in sleep, who clutches a cloth doll Delilah herself stitched together from dress scraps. The doll's face is crude, 2 button eyes, a line of red thread for a mouth, but Catherine loves it fiercely, carries it everywhere, calls it baby. In the moonlight, the child looks impossibly fragile. Her blonde curls spread across the pillow like spilled honey. Her chest rises and falls with the steady rhythm of innocent sleep. She is 4 years old. The same age Grace would be now, if Grace still lived at Ashwood. If Grace hadn't been sold to a New Orleans merchant who might have worked her in his house, or rented her out, or done any number of things that Delilah forces herself not to imagine in the deepest hours of the night. 3 children for 1. The arithmetic seems unbalanced, inadequate. How many white children would equal 1 black child in this obscene calculation? How much Rowan blood would balance the scales against all the blood soaked into Ashwood soil over decades of bondage? There is no equation that satisfies. There is only this, the cotton in her hands, the sleeping child before her, and the terrible momentum of what has already been set in motion. Delilah reaches down and gently removes the doll from Catherine's grasp. The child's fingers twitch, seeking the familiar comfort, but she doesn't wake. Delilah sets the doll on the bedside table, positioning it so its button eyes seem to watch. Then she unwraps the final lengths of cotton from her left hand. Her palms are slick now, with sweat, with Thomas's blood, with the residue of unspeakable acts. The cotton adheres to her skin, reluctant to release. She peels it away slowly, feeling the fibers pull at the calluses and scars that map her life's labor. This cotton came from the eastern field, the one they call Glory Field because it produces the finest bolls, the whitest fiber, commands the highest price at market. Delilah picked this very cotton 3 months ago, during the height of summer when the heat made the air shimmer and old Jonas collapse between the rows, his heart giving out at age 52. They'd left his body there until sunset, not wanting to interrupt the day's work. His blood had soaked into the red clay, feeding the roots of plants whose harvest would be sold to buy more slaves to replace him. The cycle is perpetual. The machine is self-sustaining. Until someone breaks it. Delilah places her hand on Catherine's small shoulder. The child is warm through her thin nightgown, her body radiating the heat of deep sleep. At the touch, Catherine stirs, her eyelids fluttering. "Mama," she murmurs, still dreaming. "No, baby," Delilah whispers. "Not your mama." Catherine's eyes open. For a moment, they're unfocused, confused. Then they find Delilah's face, and the child smiles, a sleepy, trusting smile that cuts deeper than any knife. "Delilah," Catherine says. "I had a dream about horses. Can we see the horses tomorrow?" "Hush now," Delilah says softly, bringing the cotton toward the child's face. Catherine sees the cotton and her smile falters. "What's that for?" "To help you sleep." "But I'm already sleeping." The child's logic is impeccable, innocent. "Delilah, you're being silly." 2 weeks ago, Catherine had found Delilah crying in the pantry. It had been the anniversary of Grace's sale, 3 years to the day, and Delilah had sought a moment of privacy to let the grief overwhelm her as it did every year on that date. She'd thought to herself alone, thought she could afford a few moments of weakness. But Catherine had wandered in, searching for the molasses cookies cook kept on the high shelf. She'd seen Delilah's tears and gone very still, her 4-year-old mind trying to process the sight of an adult in distress. "Why are you sad?" Catherine had asked. Delilah had wiped her eyes quickly. "It's nothing, Miss Catherine. Just something in my eye." "That's not true." The child's voice had been serious, almost stern. "You're crying. I can tell." They'd stared at each other across the pantry, woman and child, slave and master's daughter, 2 people separated by an unbridgeable chasm of circumstance and power. Then Catherine had done something unexpected. She'd walked over and wrapped her small arms around Delilah's legs in an awkward embrace. "Don't be sad," she'd said into Delilah's skirts. "When I'm sad, Mama gives me a cookie. Do you want a cookie?" Delilah had looked down at the blonde head pressed against her, had felt the small arms squeezing tight, and had experienced something she couldn't name. Not quite hope, hope was too dangerous a thing to feel at Ashwood. But perhaps a recognition that this child, at least, still possessed some capacity for empathy, some spark of human feeling that hadn't yet been corrupted by the system into which she'd been born. "Thank you, Miss Catherine," Delilah had managed. "That's very kind." Catherine had pulled back and smiled up at her. "You're welcome. But you have to stop crying now, or Mama will get angry." Even kindness, at Ashwood, existed within the framework of fear and control. Now, in the nursery, Catherine's face begins to change as the cotton approaches. The confusion sharpens into something like understanding, not full understanding, she's too young for that, but animal instinct recognizing threat. "No," Catherine says, her voice small but firm. "I don't want that." "I know, baby," Delilah says, and there's genuine sorrow in her voice now. "I know you don't." "Then don't." Catherine's eyes dart toward Margaret's bed, and something in the quality of stillness there makes her stiffen. "Delilah, what's wrong with Margaret? Why isn't she moving?" "She's sleeping." "No." Catherine's voice rises. "No, she's not. Something's wrong. Delilah, something's wrong." The child tries to sit up, but Delilah's hand on her shoulder holds her down. Catherine struggles, her small body writhing, her voice climbing toward a scream. Delilah moves quickly, bringing the cotton to Catherine's mouth even as the child tries to cry out. Thomas. Catherine manages before the cotton silences her. Thomas, wake up. But Thomas will never wake again. Delilah works the cotton between Catherine's lips, feeling the small teeth try to bite down, feeling the tongue push back against the intrusion. Catherine's hands come up, grabbing at Delilah's wrists with surprising strength. The child's nails scratch deep furrows into Delilah's forearms, drawing blood. I'm sorry, Delilah whispers, and she means it. Of all the horrors of this night, this might be the worst, that she must kill the one who showed her kindness, however small. I'm so sorry, baby. But you're one of them. You'll always be one of them. Catherine's eyes are huge, terrified, pleading. They're the same shade of blue as Grace's eyes had been brown, different colors, same human fear, same desperate will to live. The child kicks and thrashes, her small body fighting with everything it has. But everything isn't enough. It's never enough when you're small and powerless and at the mercy of someone stronger. Delilah knows this lesson intimately. Grace's eyes had been brown like Delilah's own, brown like rich soil, brown like the bark of the oak trees that shaded the slave quarters. The day they took her, those eyes had been wide with confusion and fear, not understanding why her mama wasn't coming with her, why strange hands were lifting her into a wagon, why everything familiar was receding into the distance. Mama! Grace screamed. Mama, help me. But Delilah hadn't been able to help. She'd been held back by Master Rowan's grip on her arm, held back by the fundamental reality of her powerlessness. She was property. Her daughter was property. And property didn't get to decide its own fate. That night, after Master Rowan had finally released her and she'd stumbled back to the quarters, old Esther had found her keening in the dirt outside her cabin, making sounds no human throat should make. You got to decide, Esther had said, kneeling beside her in the darkness. You have to decide if you're gonna survive this or let it kill you. I can't survive it, Delilah had gasped. I can't live knowing she's out there, scared and alone, calling for me. Then you got to make it mean something. Esther's voice had been hard, unyielding. You got to take this pain and make it into something they'll remember. You hear me, girl? Make them remember. At the time, Delilah hadn't understood. She'd been too deep in her grief, too shattered by loss. But the words had planted themselves in her mind like seeds in fertile soil, and over the months and years, they'd grown into this dark purpose. Make them remember. Catherine's struggles are weakening. Her small chest heaves, fighting for air that won't come past the cotton packed in her mouth and throat. Tears stream from her eyes, running down her temples into her hair. Her hands still clutch at Delilah's arms, but the grip is loosening, the strength draining away. I had a daughter, Delilah tells her, needing someone to hear it, even if that someone is dying. Her name was Grace. She was yours, 3 years old when they sold her. Your mama sold her to pay gambling debts. Your papa let it happen. Catherine's eyes are losing focus, the blue fading to something distant and glassy. You gave me a cookie once, Delilah continues, her voice breaking. You tried to make me feel better. That was kind. You were kind, sometimes. The child's body gives one final, convulsive jerk. Her back arches off the mattress, every muscle going rigid in a last, desperate fight for life. Then, like a string cut, she collapses back onto the bed. Stillness. Absolute and final. Delilah remains bent over the small body, her hands still in position, even though there's no need anymore. Her own tears fall now, hot and unexpected, landing on Catherine's pale cheek and rolling down like the child is crying too. But kindness isn't enough, Delilah whispers to the corpse. Not when the whole world is rotten. Not when the system itself is evil. Individual kindness can't absolve collective sin. She straightens slowly, her back protesting. Her hands shake as she steps away from the bed. 3 small bodies now lie in the moonlit nursery, arranged peacefully in their beds as if sleeping. Only the cotton visible between their lips betrays the truth. 3 children died by her hands. 3 heirs to Ashwood Plantation, to 300 acres of cotton, to 47 human souls held in bondage. 3 lives taken in exchange for 1, though the mathematics will never balance, could never balance, not if she killed 1,000 children, not if she burned Mississippi itself to ash. Delilah walks to the center of the nursery and looks at each bed in turn. Margaret, Thomas, Catherine. The past, present, and future of the Rowan family, snuffed out in a single night by the hands that served them. Then, with careful deliberation, she retrieves Catherine's doll from the bedside table. She carries it to the rocking chair where she spent countless nights soothing these children, rocking Margaret through colic, singing Thomas through nightmares, telling Catherine stories about princesses and kingdoms far away. She sits down, cradles the doll in her arms, and begins to rock. Back and forth. Back and forth. The chair creaks rhythmically in the darkness, a lullaby for the dead. The clock in the downstairs hall chimes 3 times. Delilah rocks in the darkness, Catherine's crude doll pressed against her chest, and counts the chimes like prayers. 3 o'clock. 3 hours since midnight. 3 children died. The number 3 echoes through everything tonight, a terrible trinity of loss and vengeance. Outside, the cicadas have finally gone silent, their nightly chorus exhausted. In the hush that follows, Delilah can hear the house itself, the settling of old wood, the whisper of wind through cracks in the windowsills, the distant sound of the river that runs along Ashwood's eastern border. The Mississippi, wide and brown and patient, flowing south toward New Orleans where Grace was taken, where she might still be, where she might already be dead. Delilah's arms tighten around the doll. Its button eyes stare up at her, black and empty and accusing. She should run. Every rational part of her mind knows this. The night is still dark enough to provide cover. She could slip out through the kitchen, make for the river, follow it north toward the free states that exist only in whispered legends among the slaves. Others have tried. Most have been caught, brought back, made examples of. But some, a precious few, have disappeared into the night and never been seen again, which the other slaves choose to interpret as success rather than death in a swamp or forest somewhere. But Delilah doesn't move from the chair. The rocking continues, steady and hypnotic. She is done running. Done hiding. Done existing in the spaces between other people's cruelties, trying to survive by making herself small and invisible and compliant. Tonight, she has made herself large. Tonight, she has taken up space in the most definitive way possible. And now she will wait for the consequences of that choice, will meet them with her head up and her back straight. Let them come. The first memory that surfaces in the long darkness is not her own, it's her mother's, passed down in whispered fragments during the brief moments they had together before Ruth's death. Ruth had been born in Virginia, on a tobacco plantation owned by a man named Thaddeus Whitmore. She'd been sold south at age 16, separated from her own mother and 3 siblings, transported to Mississippi in a coffin, chained at the neck to 20 other slaves, marching for weeks through the wilderness. I tried to remember their faces, Ruth had told Delilah once, her voice distant and hollow. My mama, my brothers, my baby sister. But the years wear away at memory like water on stone. Now when I try to picture my mama, all I see is blank space where her face should be. Ruth had been purchased by Edmund Rowan Sr., Master Rowan's father, to work in the wash house. She'd scrubbed clothes until her hands were permanently raw, had hauled water until her back curved into a permanent stoop. She'd been bred to a field hand named Samuel, and Delilah had been born 9 months later. You were the only thing I got to keep, Ruth had said, gripping Delilah's hand with fierce intensity. The only thing they let me have. And even that was just because you were useful to them. Delilah had been 7 when Samuel was sold off, some debt that needed settling, some account that required balancing. He'd been there one morning, gone by evening, and Ruth had never mentioned his name again. It was easier that way, to excise the lost ones from your heart like removing a rotten tooth. Painful, but necessary for survival. Except Delilah hadn't been able to do that with Grace. She'd tried. She'd attempted to hollow out the part of her heart where her daughter lived, to make herself numb. But the love had refused to die. It had curdled instead, fermenting into something darker and more potent. Into this. 4 o'clock. The chimes echo through the house. Delilah can feel time moving differently now, each minute stretching and compressing simultaneously. The night seems endless and yet far too short. Soon the sky will begin to lighten. Soon cook will wake and start the kitchen fires. Soon the house will stir to life, and someone will come to the nursery to wake the children for their breakfast. And they will find this instead. Delilah looks at the 3 beds, their occupants so still they might be carved from wax. In the darkness, with the muslin netting draped around them, they look almost romantic, like sleeping beauties from the fairy tales Mistress Beatrice sometimes made Delilah read aloud. Princesses under a curse, waiting for true love's kiss to wake them. But there will be no waking. No kisses. No happily ever after. Only the cotton lodged in their throats, and the questions that will haunt Ashwood forever after. Delilah wonders what story they'll tell about this night. Will they say she went mad? That some darkness possessed her, some evil spirit that transformed a docile house slave into a monster. That's what they'll want to believe, that this was an aberration, an anomaly, something outside the natural order of things. They won't want to consider the alternative, that this was inevitable. That you cannot build a world on cruelty and expect that cruelty to never come home. That every lash of the whip, every child sold, every human soul commodified plant seeds that must eventually bear fruit, bitter and poisonous though it may be. A sound from below. Delilah's rocking stops. Footsteps, heavy, male, moving through the downstairs hall. Master Rowan, most likely, making one of his periodic nighttime tours of the house. He does this sometimes when he can't sleep, checking doors and windows, ensuring his property is secure. The footsteps pause at the base of the stairs. Delilah holds her breath, her fingers tightening on the doll. If he comes up now, if he checks the nursery, it ends. He'll see what she's done, raise the alarm, and whatever time she has left will be measured in hours rather than years. Part of her almost wants it, wants the reckoning to come swiftly, wants to be free of the terrible weight of what she's carrying. But the footsteps move away, retreating toward the master bedroom. A door closes. Silence returns. Delilah exhales slowly and resumes rocking. Not yet, then. She has more time in this liminal space, this pocket of darkness between the act and its consequences. Time to remember. Time to feel, or not feel. Time to reconcile herself with what she's become. A murderer. A killer of children. A slave who struck back. She thinks about Jacob, Grace's father. He'd been sold 6 months before Grace was born, traded to a plantation in Alabama for a mule and $50 cash. Delilah hadn't loved him, there hadn't been time for love, and anyway, love was a luxury slaves could rarely afford. But they'd been companions of a sort, finding brief comfort in each other's bodies during the scarce moments when they weren't being worked. He'd been the one to tell her about resistance. About the slaves in Haiti who'd risen up decades ago, killed their masters, burned the plantations, and carved out their own freedom through blood and fire. Someday, he'd whispered to her in the darkness of her cabin, "It's gonna happen here too. Has to. Can't keep people in chains forever. Eventually, the chains break or the people do, and then there's hell to pay." That's dangerous talk, Delilah had warned him. You get caught saying things like that, they'll kill you. We're all dying anyway, Jacob had replied. Just a question of whether we die on our knees or on our feet. 3 weeks later, he was gone. Sold off before his dangerous ideas could spread. But the seeds he'd planted in Delilah's mind had remained, dormant but viable, waiting for the right conditions to germinate. Grace's sale had been those conditions, the rain and sun and blood-rich soil that turned philosophy into action. 5 o'clock. The darkness outside is beginning to thin, the absolute black of night fading to charcoal gray. Delilah stands from the rocking chair, her joints protesting after hours of stillness. She sets the doll carefully back on Catherine's bedside table, positioning it just so, a final act of care for the child she's killed. Then she walks to each bed in turn, adjusting the blankets, smoothing the hair, arranging the small bodies with the same attention she's given them every morning of their lives. Margaret's nightgown has twisted during her struggles, Delilah straightens it. Thomas's hand has fallen off the bed, Delilah places it back on his chest. Catherine's blonde curls are tangled, Delilah combs them with her fingers until they lie smooth. When she's finished, the nursery looks almost normal. Peaceful. 3 children sleeping late on a summer morning. Except for the cotton. Always the cotton, white as innocence, white as lies. Delilah walks to the window and looks out at the grounds of Ashwood Plantation. The cotton fields stretch endlessly in the pre-dawn gloom, row after row of plants heavy with bowls ready for harvest. In a few hours, the slaves will be roused from their quarters, fed their meager breakfast of cornmeal mush, and sent into those fields to pick until their fingers bleed and their backs scream. But not Delilah. Her picking days are over. She presses her hand against the window glass, feeling its coolness. Beyond the fields, she can just make out the line of trees that marks the swamp, and beyond that, the river. Freedom lies north, hundreds of miles through hostile territory, across state lines and social systems designed specifically to prevent people like her from reaching it. But freedom has many definitions. She is not free, will never be free in the way white people understand freedom. But she has taken something back tonight. She has exercised her will in the most extreme way possible. She has refused to accept the role assigned to her, and has written her own story in the most permanent ink available. That is a kind of freedom. Terrible, yes. Damning, certainly. But hers. The mockingbirds begin their morning songs. Delilah has always loved mockingbirds, the way they steal other birds' melodies and make them their own, the way they sing most beautifully in the darkness just before dawn. There's something defiant about them, something that refuses to accept the limits of their own small throats. She thinks about her own voice, silenced for so many years. The songs she's sung have always been someone else's songs, lullabies for white children, spirituals that spoke of heavenly freedom because earthly freedom was unthinkable. Even her words have belonged to others. Yes, master. Right away, mistress. I'm sorry. Always sorry, always apologizing for existing, for taking up space, for being human. But tonight her hands have spoken in a language entirely her own. She wonders if Grace is hearing mockingbirds wherever she is. If she's alive, if she's being treated kindly or cruelly, if she remembers her mother's face. Delilah tries to send her daughter a message through the pre-dawn air, tries to make her understand across the distance. I remembered you. I avenged you. Your life meant something. But she knows no such message can travel. Grace is lost to her, as completely as if she'd died. Perhaps more completely, death has finality, while this not knowing stretches on endlessly, a wound that can never fully heal or fully kill. 6 o'clock. The sky is definitely lighter now, the stars fading one by one. Delilah hears sounds from below, cook moving through the kitchen, the clatter of pots, the creak of the stove door opening. The household is waking. Soon Mistress Beatrice's lady's maid will rise, and the chambermaid, and the butler. The machinery of the plantation will grind back to life, each person taking their assigned position in the great mechanism of wealth extraction and human subjugation. But today, the machinery will break down. Today, someone will scream. Delilah walks to the rocking chair one final time. She sits, folds her hands in her lap, hands that have picked cotton and scrubbed floors and murdered children, and waits. She thinks about judgment, about heaven and hell, about whether God exists and if he does, whose side he's on. The white preachers who sometimes come to Ashwood speak of a God who ordains hierarchies, who commands servants to obey their masters, who promises rewards in the afterlife for suffering endured in this one. But the slaves whisper about a different God, a God who freed the Israelites from Egypt, who knocked down walls and parted seas, who had a special love for the oppressed and downtrodden. A God of justice rather than order. Delilah doesn't know which God she'll meet. Maybe both. Maybe neither. She only knows that when they ask her why, and they will ask, will demand explanation, will need to understand how this unthinkable thing came to pass, she will tell them the truth, you took my daughter. And if they say that's not justification, not reason enough, she'll say, then you finally understand how I felt. The rocking chair creaks. The mockingbirds sing. The dawn comes on inexorably, indifferent to human sin and human suffering alike. And Delilah waits. The scream comes at 6:30, when the chambermaid, a girl named Patience, barely 14, opens the nursery door to wake the children for breakfast. It's the kind of scream that empties the lungs completely, that comes from somewhere deeper than the throat. It echoes through Ashwood's halls like a physical thing, shattering the morning quiet, sending mockingbirds fleeing from the oaks outside. Delilah doesn't move from the rocking chair. She simply turns her head toward the sound, toward Patience's face frozen in the doorway, her dark skin gone ashen, her eyes so wide the whites show all around. Lord Jesus, Patience whispers. Then, louder, Lord Jesus. Lord Jesus, no. Footsteps thunder up the stairs, Master Rowan first, still in his nightshirt, his face red from sleep and sudden exertion. Then Mistress Beatrice, her wrapper clutched around her nightgown, her blonde hair in curling papers. Then Cook, the butler, and other house slaves were drawn by the commotion. They crowd the doorway, a tableau of horror and disbelief. Master Rowan sees the beds first, the three small forms arranged so peacefully, so still. His face goes through a series of transformations: confusion, denial, dawning comprehension, and finally a grief so raw it strips away his careful veneer of mastery. He stumbles toward Margaret's bed like a man struck blind, his hands reaching for his daughter. "Margaret," he chokes out. "Margaret, wake up. Wake up now." But Margaret doesn't wake. Master Rowan's hands find the cotton protruding from her blue lips, and he recoils as if burned. Mistress Beatrice moves to Thomas's bed, then Catherine's, checking each child with increasing desperation. When she finally understands, truly understands, that all three are dead, she makes a sound no human throat should make. It starts as a wail and climbs higher, higher, until it becomes something inhuman, a keening that seems to contain every loss that has ever existed. She turns, wild-eyed, and sees Delilah sitting calmly in the rocking chair. "You," Mistress Beatrice hisses. "You did this. It's not a question." Delilah meets her gaze steadily. "Yes, ma'am." The admission hangs in the air like smoke. For a moment, no one moves. They're all frozen in this tableau, the dead children, the grieving parents, the murderer sitting peacefully among her victims. Then Master Rowan lunges. He crosses the nursery in 3 strides, his hands going for Delilah's throat. "You killed them. You killed my children." His fingers close around her windpipe, squeezing. Delilah doesn't resist. She looks into his eyes the same shade of blue as Margaret's were, as all his children's were, and sees murder there, sees the same capacity for violence she's just demonstrated. The only difference is that when he kills, the law calls it justified. When she kills, they call it atrocity. The butler and 2 field slaves who've been summoned pull Master Rowan off before he can finish strangling her. He fights them, thrashing like a hooked fish, his face purple with rage and grief. "Let me go. Let me kill her. She murdered my babies. My babies." "The law, Master Rowan," the butler says urgently. "Let the law handle it. She'll hang. She'll suffer. But you can't, not like this." Master Rowan collapses to his knees, great shuddering sobs tearing through his body. Mistress Beatrice has sunk to the floor beside Catherine's bed, clutching the child's small hand, rocking back and forth in a grotesque mirror of Delilah's earlier vigil. They lock Delilah in the cellar while they send for the sheriff. The room is dark and damp, smelling of earth and old preserves. Delilah sits on the dirt floor, her back against the stone wall, and feels nothing. No, that's not true. She feels everything. Every emotion is present simultaneously: grief and satisfaction, horror and pride, regret and righteousness. They swirl together inside her like muddy water, impossible to separate into distinct streams. Above her, she can hear the chaos of the household, running footsteps, raised voices, Mistress Beatrice's ongoing wails. The slaves are whispering too, their voices filtering down through the floorboards. She catches fragments. Can't believe Delilah would. Always so quiet, so obedient. Those poor babies. But what they did to her baby. The community is already dividing, already trying to make sense of the senseless. Some will see her as a monster. Others will see her as something else, a warning, perhaps. A consequence. A reckoning made flesh. Sheriff Thomas Caldwell arrives by mid-morning, a heavy-set man with a tobacco-stained beard and eyes like chips of flint. He questions Delilah in the cellar, a lantern casting harsh shadows across his face. "You confess to murdering those children?" he asks. "Yes, sir." "All 3 of them?" "Yes, sir." "With cotton?" "Yes, sir." He's quiet for a long moment, studying her face as if looking for signs of madness. "Why'd you do it?" This is the question Delilah has been waiting for, preparing for. She meets his eyes steadily. "They sold my daughter. Master Rowan and Mistress Beatrice sold my 3-year-old baby to pay gambling debts. Sold her to New Orleans. I don't know where she is. Don't know if she's alive or dead. Don't know if she cries for me at night." Sheriff Caldwell's expression doesn't change. "That ain't justification for murder. No, sir, Delilah agrees. I don't expect you to understand. White folks can't understand what it is to have your child ripped from your arms and sold like a piece of furniture. Can't understand what it does to a person. You saying grief made you do it? I'm saying I did it. That's all that matters, isn't it? The sheriff stands, brushing dirt from his trousers. You'll hang, he says matter-of-factly. Probably within the month. Judge Harrington doesn't tolerate murder of white children, particularly by coloreds. He'll make an example of you. I expect so. You got anything else you want to say? Any accomplices? Can anyone help you? No, sir. Just me. All me. He nods, satisfied. Then God have mercy on your soul, because Mississippi won't. Before we continue with Delilah's final days, I need to pause and ask you something. This story, this dark, necessary story, needs to be heard. If you're still with me, if you're feeling the weight of history pressing down, subscribe to this channel and hit that bell. And in the comments, tell me, where is the line between justice and vengeance? Can there even be a line when the system itself is built on violence? Leave your thoughts below. The trial is held 3 weeks later, in late August, the heat so oppressive that several spectators faint in the packed courtroom. The white citizens of the county fill every seat, overflow into the hallway, crane their necks for a glimpse of the monster who murdered innocent children in their beds. The slaves stand in the back, forbidden from sitting, their faces carefully blank. They watch Delilah lead in wearing shackles, her head held high, her expression serene. The proceedings are brief. Judge Harrington, a skeletal man with the fervor of an Old Testament prophet, wastes no time on pleasantries. How do you plead, he demands. Guilty, Your Honor. A ripple moves through the crowd. They'd expected denial, expected some attempt at self-defense or claim of insanity. The straightforward admission catches them off balance. You confess to the willful murder of Margaret Rowan, aged 8 years, Thomas Rowan, aged 6 years, and Catherine Rowan, aged 4 years. Yes, Your Honor. Do you have anything to say in your defense? Delilah is quiet for a moment. Then, they sold my daughter. Grace was her name. She was 3 years old. That's all I have to say. Judge Harrington's face hardens. The theft or sale of property does not justify murder. The natural order of society requires hierarchy, requires that some command and others obey. When that order is violated, when slaves rise up against their masters, the very foundations of civilization crumble. You have committed not just murder, but an assault on the social fabric itself. He pauses, letting his words sink in. I hereby sentence you to death by hanging, sentence to be carried out on October 15, 1844. May God have mercy on your soul. The gavel falls. The crowd erupts in approval. Delilah is led away, back to the small jail cell where she'll spend her remaining weeks. As she passes the section where the slaves stand, she catches glimpses of their faces. Some look away, ashamed or frightened to be associated with her. Others meet her eyes, and in those brief connections, she sees something that might be understanding, might be respect, might be the terrible recognition that she has done what many have dreamed of but never dared. Old Esther is there, tears streaming down her weathered face. She nods once, a gesture of acknowledgement, of farewell, of something that might be pride. The weeks pass slowly. Delilah sits in her cell, a Bible provided by a well-meaning minister who visits occasionally to pray for her soul. She doesn't read it. She spends her time remembering instead, not the murders, but everything that came before. Her mother's songs. The taste of blackberries stolen from the brambles behind the slave quarters. The weight of grace in her arms, that perfect, impossible weight. Jacob's laugh. The feel of rain on her face during the brief moments when she was allowed to stand still and simply exist. She thinks about whether she feels remorse. The minister wants her to repent, to beg forgiveness, to acknowledge her sin. But she can't quite locate that emotion. She feels sorrow, deep, oceanic sorrow for the children who didn't choose their parents, didn't choose to be born into a system built on brutality. But remorse? That would require believing she'd had another choice, some better path forward. And she can't see one. In the architecture of slavery, there are no good choices, only varying degrees of complicity and suffering. Other slaves are hanged for attempting escape, for talking back, for infractions that barely register as crimes when white people commit them. If she was going to die anyway, and as enslaved property, death was always close, at least she died having spoken with her hands, having refused the silence that was the only speech permitted to her. October 15th arrives cold and gray, unusual for Mississippi. The sky threatens rain, and wind whips through the town square where the gallows have been erected. A crowd has gathered, hundreds of white faces, eager for the spectacle of justice, for the reassurance that order will be maintained. Master Rowan and Mistress Beatrice stand at the front, their faces hollowed by grief. In 3 weeks, they've aged decades. Ashwood Plantation continues without their children, the cotton still needs picking, the household still needs running, but something essential has broken. They are going through motions now, animated corpses walking through a world that has lost all meaning. Delilah is led up the gallows steps. The noose is placed around her neck, rough hemp against her skin. The hangman asks if she has any final words. She looks out over the crowd, her eyes finding the small group of slaves forced to attend as a warning, a deterrent. Then she looks at Master and Mistress Rowan. "I loved my daughter the same way you loved yours," she says, her voice carrying in the cold air. "Remember that. When you think about what I did, remember that a slave's love is the same as a white person's love. A slave's grief is the same grief. A slave's rage is the same rage. We're human, same as you. That's what you can't forgive. Hang her," someone shouts from the crowd. Others take up the cry. The hangman places the hood over Delilah's head. Darkness descends, muffling the sounds of the crowd. She feels the platform beneath her feet, solid for one last moment. She thinks of Grace. Wonders if somehow, across the distance and the years, her daughter will know that she was loved. That she mattered. That her loss unleashed something that couldn't be contained. The platform drops. There is a moment of falling, of weightlessness, of absolute freedom. Then nothing. Ashwood Plantation never recovers. Master Rowan tries. In the months following the hangings, Delilah's body was displayed for 3 days as a warning, then buried in an unmarked grave beyond the property, but his heart isn't in it. He walks through his fields and sees only the cotton that killed his children, the white balls that might as well be soaked in their blood. He drinks more. Rages at the remaining slaves. Makes increasingly erratic decisions about planting and harvest. By the spring of 1845, Ashwood was operating at half capacity. By 1846, the bank was threatening foreclosure. Mistress Beatrice takes to her bed and rarely leaves it. She speaks sometimes to the ghosts of her children, having conversations with empty air. The house slaves whisper that she's lost her mind, broken by grief and guilt in equal measure. The nursery is locked. No one enters it for years. When the house is finally abandoned in 1851, sold at auction for a fraction of its former value, local children dare each other to peek through the windows. They claim to see 3 small figures in the beds, sleeping eternally beneath muslin netting. They claim to hear a woman's voice singing lullabies in the darkness. No family will stay at Ashwood long. The land itself seems cursed. Crops fail. Livestock sickens. Children born there grow up haunted, plagued by nightmares of suffocation, of soft white cotton filling their mouths and throats. During the Civil War, Union troops camped briefly on the property. Several soldiers report seeing a dark-skinned woman rocking in a chair in an upstairs room, holding a child. When they investigate, the room is empty except for dust and decay. After emancipation, freed slaves refuse to work the land. That ground remembers, they say. It knows what happened. Best to let it lie. The house burned in 1873, cause unknown, though some claim to have seen a woman's figure in one of the upper windows just before the flames took hold. The ruins stand for another decade before being cleared away, leaving only the foundation and the chimney standing like a gravestone. The cotton, though, the cotton keeps growing. Long after the house is gone, long after everyone who witnessed that terrible night has died, cotton continues to sprout wild across the land. It pushes up through the red clay, spreads across what used to be the carefully tended fields, and reclaims the space where the slave quarters stood. No one plants it. No one tends it. It simply grows, season after season, white bowls opening to the sun. Botanists who examine the site in later years are puzzled. The cotton shouldn't grow like this, shouldn't thrive without human intervention. But it does, persistent and patient as revenge itself. In 1963, during the height of the civil rights movement, a group of activists visited the site. They stand among the wild cotton and tell the story of Delilah, what little is known, passed down through oral histories and fragmented records. They speak of her as a symbol, a warning, a prophecy fulfilled, that oppression always plants the seeds of its own destruction. A young woman in the group reaches down and picks a ball, feeling the soft fiber and the sharp edges that cut her finger. She watches her blood disappear into the white. "It's still hungry," she says quietly. Today, the land where Ashwood Plantation once stood is marked only by a small historical plaque, installed in 1998. It reads, "Site of Ashwood Plantation, 1808 to 1851. On this land, cotton was cultivated through the labor of enslaved persons. In 1844, 3 children of the Rowan family were murdered by a house slave named Delilah, who was subsequently executed. This tragedy reflects the violence inherent in the institution of slavery and its lasting impact on American history. The plaque sanitizes, simplifies, reduces complex horror to digestible facts. It doesn't mention grace. Doesn't mention the selling of children, the casual cruelties, the system that created the conditions for tragedy. It doesn't mention that on certain nights, particularly in August when the heat is oppressive and the air feels thick enough to choke on, people passing the site report hearing children's laughter mixing with a woman's voice singing songs in a language half remembered, half invented. It doesn't mention that the cotton still grows, wild and white and patient. It doesn't mention that the soil remembers everything. Tourists come sometimes, take photos, marvel at the persistence of the cotton. They reach down to touch the soft bolls, and sometimes, just sometimes, they feel the sharp edges bite. They pull back, surprised, looking at the small beads of blood on their fingers. And the cotton absorbs it all, drinking deep, the white fiber stained red for just a moment before the color disappears, pulled down into roots that reach deep into soil fertilized by centuries of suffering. The land remembers. The cotton remembers. And on nights when the mockingbirds sing their stolen songs in the darkness before dawn, some say you can still hear the creak of a rocking chair, the sound drifting across fields that refuse to forget. Back and forth. Back and forth. The harvest never ends. This is where our story concludes, in a field of wild cotton, in the space between history and haunting, in the recognition that some acts are so terrible and necessary they echo through centuries. If this story moved you, disturbed you, made you think, then do me a favor, subscribe to this channel for more dark historical tales. And down in the comments, I want to hear from you, is Delilah a villain or a victim? A murderer or a martyr? Or is she something more complex than either label can contain? Leave your thoughts below, and remember, history is written in blood and soil, and the ground never forgets. Thank you for watching. Until next time, sleep well, if you can.